Welcome to a big and juicy topic. I love being able to connect with this community, with us, where we can have safe and really important conversations around aspects of money, our identity, where it weaves through our aspect of life. And we always say, money weaves through every aspect of our life. And we often think it's the external side. It's the food on our table, it's the roof over our head, it's, the holiday we can and can't do. But the inner relationship with identity, worthiness, success, power is such an interesting and important edge for us to also explore when we're really looking at our own freedom, looking at our relationship with money, when we give it, and our ability to actually thrive in life is so linked to this. And I am so excited today to introduce you and welcome, and huge welcome, Chris Joseph.
It's great to be here, and thank you for the invite to speak to your community today about what is a really important area, right?
Yeah, so important. So I'm going to give a little intro to Chris, but it never touches the base. So he's Dr. Chris Joseph, hell yeah. And Chris is actually in a in coaching group with me and connected with Chris. And Chris is fast becoming a very dear person with me, where there's this simpatico, this alignment. But that's from my personal side. There are some very fortunate people in the world who get to call Chris their coach. Chris is a transformational coach working with just a handful of people who truly want to explore what is possible for them in life, where they're not yet free. What is that next side? And really, I love what Chris is saying, how to create and live a life in every aspect, their work, their identity, their family, their relationship with their body, the whole side that they want to wake up to every morning. So I said, so Chris, thank you for giving your time to hear, because I know how precious time is. We've spoken about that. And so thank you for coming and being prepared to, well, more than prepared, share a story, a powerful story of yours, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of I love that word transformation. How do we transform? Because that's really the edge of experiences we have into things that either destroy us or light up. So we are going to be having conversations. So I didn't even really announce. We are talking about scams and shams and the traps, that how we get into them, what happens around it. But then, way more importantly, how do we come out of those and not let the devastating energies of shame, disempowerment, and lack of trust with ourselves prevent us? Because for me, that's the biggest damage that often happens. Yes, there can be financial loss. And so many of you have also shared some of your stories. So we'll bring some of those in. We'll be opening to questions if you want to share. Our amazing Katrina Ellis, who's also a part of our community, is here. She's going to come and share some of her story. But Chris, let's dive right on in. Before we get to all the amazing transformational coach side, can you share the story of where you were scammed? Here is someone, PhD, transformational coach, extraordinary business owner side, and you got scammed, Chris.
I did indeed, yeah, and it was certainly slightly embarrassing at the time because, as you've just pointed out, somebody who's supposed to be well educated, but the sort of greed and delusion, probably the two kind of driving forces there. I'm happy to admit. Give you a bit of context, and this was, some time ago. I think it was around about 2010 that I originally decided to make this investment, and at that point, I did not have the coaching business I have now. It was a definitely a fledgling business, not creating a massive amount of wealth from the business. And my brother-in-law seemed to be doing pretty well. He pulled up in his Porsche outside my house one day, and I got curious and asked him questions. And he told me about investment scheme. It's foreign exchange trading, abbreviated often to Forex. between the dollar and the euro. And for people who don't know, basically you just trade between the currencies and they shift over the day and you end up making money. So he wasn't doing the trading. He had a guy, he was invested in a company in Turkey that was doing the trading, and he had made a lot of money from it, clearly. He'd retired at the age of 40 something. And I got curious and I kind of watched. I did watch for a year or so. And it continued to do well. And then I made the decision to invest. Do you want me to carry on?
Please do share this juicy story. And what's so beautiful is, as you're threading, because you are such an amazing transformational coach, when we say through you, what is that curiosity? What is the environment? What are the things that make us either more susceptible, or the stories in our heads, and it's so powerful. You already had social um, a trust banner, because there's already evidence of somebody that you believe side. So dive on in. So you decided to go beyond curious and get on in.
So I invested. We didn't have a lot of money at that time. So I can't remember what the initial investment was, something like, I don't know, 10, 15K. I don't come from a particularly wealthy family. My parents at the t time, that they'd built their wealth, through working hard. My dad's an engineer by trade, so they sort of saved over the years. And I made the decision to tell them also about the investment opportunity. And they were excited. It was doing about 5% per month at
Wow.
that time.
So
Uh,
you're talking about, a compounded return of, 70% per annum. Yeah, that's like, as you talk, we can look in hindsight and use the words like greed, but it's like, oh, well, shit, we're lucky. And there's the inside track. There's a few of us have got this. Well, wow, they're getting it.
exactly. And as I said, I'd watched for a year. My brother-in-law had pulled out his entire investment at one point and then decided to reinvest a part of it. Um, so my parents invested as well. And then over a period of about 2 or 3 years, we'd invested several hundred thousand, and the account value on paper between myself and my wife and my parents got up to $1.4 million. And then things started to dry up. Yeah. So my parents hadn't pulled any money out, but myself and my wife were
Or
pulling.
was it one of those schemes where they encourage you to reinvest and you rather get that return growing because there's going to be more, do the next
Well,
deal? Yeah.
yeah, and they weren't even doing that, right? The human nature was enough to do that on their behalf. So this was the thing also built confidence because it wasn't a particularly pushy system. We weren't being badgered for further investment, nothing of the sort. In fact, all investments had to come off our instigation. An email was sent and then there was paperwork to fill in and etc. And we had to make the transfer. And so there were barriers to entry, but in fact, those barriers to entry, you know, A, built the sort of confidence this was a legitimate investment
Yeah.
scheme, and B, served as like filters for the type of clients that clearly they were attracting. My accountant was also invested.
So yeah, so there's all these authority figures. I love it because I think that's a really important point that you've just raised, that it's not, well, this is just too easy. I'm being badgered, I'm being pushed, that sort of scammer. It's almost like, well, yeah, there's a little bit of barrier, as you say. You've got to make that effort. And so then there's that confirmation bias that also comes in of the what we think a scam might look like or not. So, Chris, now you've got a pretty juicy amount on paper. Your parents are substantially in by this stage. So you had got them.
Yeah. Yeah, they'd put in probably 90, 95% of their life savings in. I'd remortgaged the house and put another 77,000 in. I'd this is very painful to admit. I'd actually put in the money, relatively small, but not the point, money we'd saved for our children at that point. They were young, toddlers. Um,
And that's really interesting, Chris, because I think in hindsight, we can look and go, okay, diversification, risk strategy, never put everything in one basket. But we'll come back to, where does our frontal cortex shut down in certain situations? What makes us believe this is different, this is unique? Is that so interesting? Okay, so now
Well,
you're
this,
all putting all in.
yeah, yeah, we're all in. And just to add to that, I was also in the coaching world at this time. So I was attending workshops where Forex trading was consistently being talked about. I knew of other people who were trading themselves and getting the types of returns that I was getting through this company. So there's a lot of other stuff that was going to like to corroborate that this was a legitimate thing, and I was just lucky to be part of this. Yeah. So then we started asking for money, and the answer was kind of no, we can't yet. We need to wait. And then there were this excuse after excuse being fed to us for a period of about a year, all the way to the point where the American authorities were investigating because there's some trade that had been done that had been declared, and it was just BS basically. I'd managed, I think I was one of the last investors to actually get a payment out for about 5K, and that was in the summer of 2014. And there was nothing else beyond that. And then finally, on the 3rd of December 2014, had the email. I'll just read the first paragraph. And I remember vividly, reading this email, and I was sat in the other room in this particular house. So it says, "Dear investor, I am writing to inform you that JL Trading is ceasing to carry on business. Contrary to the impression that I have hitherto given, the business has lost almost all of its assets, and there appears no prospect of those assets being recouped. JL Trading ceased foreign exchange trading in 2009. That was 5 years prior to this email being written. Following substantial losses, and since that time, the business has suffered further losses." And he goes on to say that he tried to make it up. And we still don't actually know if it was a legitimate trade-in and then it became a Ponzi scheme. Often these things do start like that. And the person doubles down, loses money, and then they try and recoup and they just get in a hole, bigger hole. I'd like to think that, but the guy, was prosecuted. He's spent 6, 7 years in jail. He's probably due to be released, actually, if he hasn't already been released. But that was the email. Yeah.
So, Chris, that hits you. And now what? Because this is a point where, I mean, I think we've got a window in that, but I think this sequence of decisions we make following some form of devastation. Maybe it's financial loss through scam, whether it's market crash, whether it's, somebody dies. Um, it's this path. And I think for me, your story is quite remarkable here because now you've got this email and you're going, okay, fuck. I'm putting in words. Maybe he'll say it with a much nicer Welsh accent. Um, but there's your parents. There's a side. What was what was the journey now?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because I think you had also shared to me, because this was also growing, there wasn't much energy for you to really grow the business much because, hey, that was coming up nicely. So there was also a bit of a,
Yep.
well, we've got the money side of life sorted.
Yeah, absolutely. For a period of years, we could see the account growing. We were pulling money out passively, monthly to live off. I'd effectively given up the coaching work. I was doing a small amount of training to PhD students. I'd decided to look after my daughter half a day when she was preschool for about 18 months. So that was a massive benefit to come from that period. And then this. So obviously I'm lighthearted today about it, but at that time, yeah, I remember opening the email. It wasn't completely out of the blue because, of course, we hadn't been able to pull money out for some time. I just felt cold. Um, I remember walking out of the room that I was in and across the landing and sat on my son's bed for some random reason. I wouldn't normally do that in the daytime. Maybe it was a desire for a different perspective, maybe a deep calling for that. And it was weird, and it was like obviously big impact shock, but equally like a massive, massive, massive call to action. So there's this weird duality going on of emotion in me. And my wife came through the door. She was a teacher at that time. She now works in the business. Um, but that time she was teaching, she'd seen the email on her phone, and I could see her face was ashen. And we spoke, and clearly she was upset. And I looked at her in the eye and I said, "I've got this." And that was, if I'm honest with you, was the call to action that I really, needed, because the stuff that was truly important to me, I was passive on, the coaching, serving people, serving high functioning people to live the life they want. I'd become passive and lazy and somewhat settled to this income that was being provided to me. So it was a kick up the behind, as they say. Yeah.
It's such an, and thank you for that perspective, because it's in that point as to saying either this is going to define me as broken or wrong or side, or it's a reclaiming. And I'm sure this also happens in stages and bits and pieces, and we've got others who'll, share some of their story inside. But for you here and your coaching work now, are there things when we get that kind of shock we can do to then make those choices more consciously? You think? I mean, you said I've got this, but obviously there was still your parents to be told, the process to go through. How did you stay on the side of
Mhm.
I'm not going to let this define me as I'm broken, stupid, shameful, and you said we can still feel embarrassed, like, oh fuck, how did this happen? But how did you navigate that edge?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a short and long answer to that. The short answer is I carry a primary question around with me all the time, and that is, how can I use this?
Nice.
No matter what happens in my life, whether it is quote unquote positive, quote unquote negative, because neither of those two things are actually defined until we define them. I think Shakespeare said, nothing is good or bad until thinking makes it so. And people kind of wash over that one. But if you slow it down on that, nothing is good or bad, which is a strong, strong statement until our thinking makes it so. So the question of how can I use this is a question to my thinking mind. And that's people often forget, is like, think the thoughts, they're not just happen to us. They're a product of the questions we ask of our mind. So the question, like, how can I use this, was a valuable, and it's been the most valuable question I've had, throughout my life. And I sat there on my
I
son's
just want
bed.
to pause and just stop and go, hell yeah, I think, and because we can also practice. We don't have to wait until we're in a highly charged, high stakes side. It's almost one of those things, almost every day. Like, am I being aware of how can I use this? How can I use this? What happened today? How can I use that? How's it in service of my life? What can being that side? So I just want to restate that what you just said, we define the meaning, and it's the questions we ask that are going to be the things done. So okay, so you've got this. Christy brought tears to her eyes, and absolutely, Christy, I love it, because I think, Chris, you were saying it as much to yourself as to your wife. And we also have to say that to ourselves.
I was, yeah. If you're familiar with Gary Chapman's love languages, my top one is words of affirmation. So when I vocalize something to somebody and make a commitment to somebody, I also listen, of course, and that, runs deep then in me. So you're right, is for my ears as much as hers. And it's a commitment of intent as well. And the question that I asked a second ago, we haven't talked about it, but it's the victim owner spectrum. And when you answer a question like, how can I use this? You can't stay in victimhood if you genuinely answer that question. If you answer the question, it automatically shifts you along that spectrum towards ownership. And even people on this call today, is like, the context of my story is not your story, and you might not have been scammed in any way, but there'd be relationships you've got around trust, etc. So ask yourself the question, like, how can I use what Chris is sharing today for my life? It's such a powerful question. Yeah.
No, I love it because it starts with the presupposition that it's I. It's up to me. Is I get to use this. I get to do this as opposed to the situation must be different for me to be okay, or that victimhood, that outside, that external locus of control. Oh, so beautiful, Chris. Okay, so here you are. You've got this. You said, how can I use this? What was the next steps in this? Do, do,
But
do.
let me share a story. Literally a couple of weeks after, I was in a local shop, and it I was visiting my parents because, of course, they had the email the same time as I did, and I phoned them. My mother was crying in the background. My dad was fairly stoic.
But
There,
90% of their retirement savings, their life savings were
yeah.
gone.
And my mother had a muscle wastage disease, myotonic dystrophy. It's quite rare, affects about one in 8,000 people. And the money was really for the care of her in her old age. Um, so they're sat there really in a far worse position than me because they're elderly, they haven't got the capacity to rebuild. The money was for the care of my mother. And I'd introduced them to the scheme. Um, so I was in this shop and I bought the paper because it made the headlines of the local tabloids here in the UK. This is the Daily Mirror, one of the tabloid papers, and this is dated the 22nd of December 2014. So the third is when I had the email, so it's a few weeks later. And yeah, and that is the guy. I can speak freely about this now because the court case is closed. There was a lot of things that were going on. There was what I've just talked about, which is like how can I make this good? What does I've got this actually mean? And then of course there were lots of thoughts about my business. How can I re-engage? How can I grow that? Um, the other side, of course, were then the ambulance chasing lawyers who were after the entire kind of trading or the investing community, trying to create group action and so on. And of course, some with good intent. I'm sure many with good intent, and then maybe some not with not so good intent. And we made the decision not to partake in that, and that was a big decision. I mentioned a second ago there was a short answer and a long answer, and the short answer was that question. The long answer is really this process, which I call the 5 A's to freedom, and I'll briefly give it. First A is awareness. Second A is acceptance. The third A is aspiration. And then the fourth is abundance. And the fifth is audacious action.
Okay, so it's awareness.
So awareness, acceptance.
That sort of acceptance of just whatever is, whatever
Yeah.
that is,
So so
whatever
so
right now. Sort of like coming to the
yeah.
present.
Yeah. So,
Okay,
so like,
true.
yeah, if I briefly go through the situations, like awareness is like, well, what?
Awareness, acceptance. I'm just going to type it so
Yeah.
it's in.
Yeah. Awareness, acceptance, um, then aspiration, then then abundance, and then audacious action. And I've kind of used this as my signature 5 A's to freedom with my clients as an umbrella kind of structure for a little while. And I was ahead of this call today, I was thinking I've never actually talked about this event under this framework, so it's quite useful to do that. The awareness aspect was like what actually has happened and what hasn't happened. There's a lot of stuff that hadn't happened that the mind can go to thinking it's happened. Like,
All of the movies in our mind, we're racing forward, we're racing back.
yeah, like, I'm ruined. I'll never, never become wealthy. I'm on the poverty line. My parents are going to die poor. All this stuff, right? The family would disintegrate because, of course, my sister, who was not part of the investment, she'd lost her inheritance. My brother-in-law was clearly feeling guilty because he'd introduced me. I was feeling somewhat guilty because I introduced my parents. There was all this dynamics going on. We had to resolve, and we did quickly, actually. So that acceptance is like what's actually happened. So the awareness and acceptance is like what
I love that.
has
It's the
actually
real truth telling because the truth
happened.
does actually set us free. The truth is stops the bullshit of the personality of the nervous system from running its movies, like
Yeah.
that reality.
Exactly, exactly. And part of not partaking in the civil case, I guess, to try and chase for the money, because we just made the intuitive decision that it was gone. And we put proven right, the forensic accountant didn't find anything of any note. So we saved, those fees in the lawyers that others did spend. And also more importantly, we would just drew a mental separation at that point. Like it's gone. Now we can rebuild. Whereas that process went on for literally years, like 3 or 4 years before, the court case yeah.
I want to come back to this because this is really key. Because I think besides the shame, it's where do we get hooked in a past action and we can't move forward? And so it keeps robbing us. And just as we're talking there, I'll share a little bit of something that happened with me, but I realized that I've still got threads that I need to unhook or that is not actually serving me, holding on in a different way. So accepted truths setting you free. Tell me about aspiration.
Aspiration was then a reconnection with like, what am I about? What is my life on this earth really going to be about? Because it had become about enjoying some passive income, enjoying lovely, enjoyment of time with my daughter. But aspirationally, there'd been a dampener, ironically, because of this passive wealth put on, the acting of my aspiration. So that immediately got me reconnected. It's like, okay, okay. Because I thought about like, well, I'm smart. I did a PhD in computational mechanics, all right, in engineering. So I can trade. I can learn to trade. Why don't I just do this? And then I've got control of my account. I know it's not fraudulent. I know what I'm, doing. I can learn the ropes. I caught myself quite early in that one. It's like, whoa, 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 wait. This is not my true north. If for other people, it might be their true north. I'm not making a general statement there. And likewise with the decision to not pursue in court, for other people, that might be the right decision, even though you can do that and still be detached from it. But for me, the aspiration was definitely coaching, was to definitely serve people. That was the path I was set out on. I hadn't made a success of it by this point, but I was determined to find a way.
This reconnecting, this why, and really going, what's my life to be lived? I love how you're saying it could be somebody else's, and I love how you put it, this aspiration. It reconnects to that inspiration, that thing that pulls you forward, that keeps remembering that there's a life to be lived. There's this one precious friggin' life, this life force. Am I going to spend it? And this is such a beautiful edge around the money side because yes, you could spend all our days trading, and maybe somebody really that is why they're here, that side. But it's this edge between money and service of life versus money becoming the meaning of life. And it's such an edge because I'm absolutely fiercely, everybody here will know, uh, money is incredibly important. It is such a vital input. But it's an input. And because a lot of people, I'll get, the trolls on social media. Why do you, still run a business? Why don't you give us free of your financial free? Because it's about aspiration. It's about reach and purpose. And it's a privilege to be able to have a mechanism to get a value exchange. But, there's other ways I could make more money, but it's because it's what's that enough? I love what that is so beautiful, that realigning. And I'd come, we can ask some questions of how keeping coming back because it is so easy to get distracted by that.
It really is. There's two things here. There's the difference between goals and aspirations. I think it's too easy to create a goal and to go chasing after it, like a dog after a ball, right? Aspirations are, for me personally, and I think it's more than semantics. It's deeper. It's a full alignment with your true values. It's like it's the biggest kind of future-paced question there is. Like in the rocking chair when you're near death and you're having the conversation with your great grandchildren. It's like, what do you want to tell them that your life was about? What was the service element of your life? So that's aspiration. And then separately, like
I love
some.
that But you can also, I love that. Get on the rocking chair. Do you want to say, well, I spent the last 30 years being bitter and fighting this one little thing that I lost? And go, fuck, really? But you could have done all that other stuff. I love that.
Exactly that. And that would have been, see, this is the point. Like, people think I'm a victim. Like, I don't see that at all. I would have been a victim of my own mindset if I had spent that 30 years like grasping on it. And some people did. The thing is, when we got to read, and this was very recently, like the last few years, when the judge made his statement and published it, it was only then we actually learned some of the details really of the case. And people had committed suicide. People had died in this process of chasing justice. People had really, really suffered from the attachment to try and make amends or create an outcome that was never going to be created in the end, rather than just separate and release that energy to create the aspirational life that they wanted to create.
Oh, just so huge. Take me to abundance.
Yeah, well, abundance is the best way to define abundance is something that somebody shared in an open forum. It was in a workshop in London. I don't know, it was about a year, maybe so after this email, and I was re-engaged with the coaching process, and I was doing some training myself. And they didn't know my story, and they said, wealth is what you have when all of your money has gone. And it's like, wow, they have no idea how valuable that share is for me. Wealth is what you have when all of your money has gone. Because I literally, we were down to less than 5K. I was earning nothing really from coaching at that point. My wife was a secondary school, a high school teacher, so a moderate wage. We had a four-bedroom house. We had two young kids,
Remortgaged.
remortgaged. So yeah, our mortgage was I don't know what it was, but yeah, the mortgage payments weren't small. Yeah, we weren't eating like baked beans every night, and we weren't like,
No,
taking
it was dry linen.
baths in water, as so I don't want people to be like sending me sodden tissues in the post. But yeah, our backs were against the wall for sure. And then somebody said that, wealth is what you have when all your money's gone. And I am so fortunate, and I mean this genuinely, to have experienced that in life, because the attachment, that the unhealthy attachment that we can so often have with money was just broken for me, because I got to experience pretty much not having any or very little.
Um,
And it was freeing. It was immensely freeing. It sounds perverse, it sounds paradoxical, and I know it is, but it was, because I then got to reconnect with like who I truly was, what my true wealth was, and what I could genuinely now offer the world. And I think that's abundance.
and
Uh,
how vast that is.
I
How
s-
vast. Stop.
yeah,
Go, oh my God, what I've got, what's available. Yeah, that thread is and this is very nuanced, and it is complex, because often it can sound like a trite, oh well, money doesn't matter. It's not that at all. It is getting into it's what how much there is creativity, resourcefulness, problem solving, relationships, health, uh, you know um, I love that. So this vast access we have literally to creation itself, that abundant flow. Ah,
and
so
there's
now you got, yeah.
there's internal abundance, but there's external abundance as well. On the internal, I've talked a little bit, but one saying by Peter Thompson is another guy I've trained with. He says, money is the silent applause for a job well done. Love that, because it links, I think, the internal and the external abundance. Money is a silent applause for a job well done. So the thing with being a victim, quote unquote, which I wasn't, but people will label that
Yeah.
on me, of a Ponzi scheme or a fraudulent investment scheme, is that you can then, of course, have trust issues moving forwards. So part of the external abundance was me saying, well, actually, look, this what's happened to me doesn't taint all of my future relationships. The vast, vast majority of people are good-hearted. They want to kind of, work with you. They want to create win-wins. They're not looking to take everything from you. And that was big as well, because you can't do this thing alone. If you're going to grow a business, you need team and you need to trust. So that's
Oh,
important.
this is a biggie, yeah, because I want to get to audacious action, but coming back to how to recreate that trust relationship with ourselves, because I think that links with shame, like, shit, how could I? Why didn't I see it? What happened there? And Katrina, I want you to come and share your story soon with Chris and I and everybody else, and navigating this and trust with life and trust with others. As I say, all of these core relationships of also having to be so careful we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't then that hypervigilance that can come, if you've been mugged, I live in a country where it's quite exciting. So I've had a few muggings and I have to be aware of just that hypervigilance. Go, no, I've got to choose. It has to be a conscious thing. So audacious action.
Yeah, and the reason for the audacious part is because you've got action, but then you've got action that is actually life-changing. Hence the use of that audacious word. And once you've kind of gone through something like I've gone through, and other people on this call have gone through their own version of this, of course, a big life event that you've actually got through, and it affirms like a deeper trust in yourself. You can actually cope with a lot more than you previously thought you could. Then a lot of actions don't actually, ironically, feel as audacious as other people might look upon them to be. So, examples have been like my fee, and I'm happy to share this. This is some time ago. My fee, like my maximum check was like £3,500, I think, for coaching prior to this event. I then created a contract for £35,000. So that was for a 12-month engagement, and it was for an apprenticeship with a coach. They apprenticed under me, and I've gone on to offer many of those types of offerings. So the 10x, the thing about 10x, and there's a great book, 10x is easier than 2x by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. When you start to think in audacious ways, it then calls upon your inner being in a different way. It calls you to step up, and it's actually easier. It's ironically easier to be in this space of 10x in, because it's actually it's a more authentic um, way to play. It's far more difficult. People don't see this. It's far more difficult to play small as a human being than to play in the way that we're
And
meant
just
to
try
play.
to hustle or expand the what already is, which often is, that 2x or, using that kind of language, versus when you truly have to take, kind of say that audacious, you have to step away and use a whole different set of creative problem solving. And we're designed for that. Our brains literally love puzzles. Give it a decent puzzle, not a shitty little 12-piece thing.
It's exactly that. Yeah, and this is conveyed as well in three levels of play. We can play not to lose, protection. We can play to win, which is kind of strive and attachment. But then there's play to play. And play to play is just like freeing. And the audacious action is an invite really to play to play. And that
Just
mapped,
as you can.
yeah, and that mapped out for me in terms of, speaking to people that I previously wouldn't have spoken to because I've sort of, put them in a certain pigeonhole, making proposals that I wouldn't have previously made, but ones that actually did serve the client because they could leverage that. And then that's how it's evolved and grown. And I was actually speaking to my wife over lunch prior to this conversation, and we worked out that in terms of the money we'd invested, I've created 10x of that, literally 10x of that
I was
since.
going I mean, isn't that just, I mean, talk about transformation, talk about turning that, and thank you for walking us through that model, because it's so key, having a framework around that. I'm all about, frameworks create freedom, and just having these things that we can lean into. Um, Chris, hell yeah. I mean, your story, and I want to also open up for any questions inside, but just thank you, thank you. Because I was going to ask, where now? And yeah, you've now got this extraordinary business. You're able to retire your wife. Well, she works in the business. I won't say she's retired. You have this amazing family. Chris introduced me to these wonderfully audacious adventures, which I'm going to be doing one of these days. He did the Poles of Inconvenience challenge with your son. You truly have, I think, a level of lifestyle, freedom, play. You're this crazy lunatic long distance trail runner. You've got a life that I know that you wake up that you love. And so thank you. I just wanted to share the story and read some of this in because it's these little edges, the decisions we make almost moment by moment, but have to remind ourselves with these practices and these frameworks to come back in. So, Chris, amazing, you're not going anywhere. But Katrina, I would love you to pop on in. Share a bit
Yeah.
about your story. Share a bit about the side. And I just want to say thank you so much, Katrina, for being voluntold to come and share. No, thank you for this. Be because there are others in our community who also were involved in the scam that you were. And so maybe just share some of that story. Maybe I think there's a simpatico with you and Chris as well. And you, it's a bit more recent for you. There's a definitely, you're in the oh fuck awareness, audacious action, how do you acceptance place. And yeah, Katrina.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Yeah, it's definitely still a bit raw. So it was just over a year that the news broke. I got that email, and mine was in the property space. So you'd think that you were going a legitimate route, that something you can touch and feel and see, and you checked it all out, and there's solicitors involved, that it would be okay. Um, but there's holes there too. And I think, right, I don't think there's any value in adding in the details of what happened, but just to say that it was in a different asset class and it was still possible, even though we owned the deeds to these houses. So ours was in the space
And
of,
I just want to, so I think,
sorry.
not in terms of the content being, but I think there's so many parallels here because often we can say, well, you had to jump through hurdles. There were actually physical property. There were deeds involved. There was sort of side, but there was also a key person who was building a trust relationship. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I've got a sense from a bit of the conversations we've had that I've had with others, almost a sense of a grooming of a certain.
Yeah, that that was definitely the feeling afterwards. Now ours is still open to investigation, so I guess being careful in what I say. Um, there was a key person in the middle of that, and I, like Chris, also introduced other people. And there was that kind of fatherly figure, and it was definitely largely females that went the way that we did in this investment piece. So there was definitely a grooming element that we looked back, and there was such huge trust, and we met this individual in the company numerous times. So it wasn't kind of a pie in the eye person or place, and we were able to touch and feel the things that we were involved in. And we had multiple different solicitors, we had multiple different banks who were mortgaging these properties, and yet still this happened. And for me personally, mine wasn't significant in terms of, it was a six-figure loss. To me, that was absolutely devastating. I've got three kids, and I had just gone through a divorce, and that upended my financial independence, which is what I was building towards. And the one thing I wanted to mention, I thought was really important on this, is that I spoke to my kids about what was happening. Because it was, and this is something that still upsets me. They could clearly see the impact on me. I was shaken. I was really shaken by what was happening, and they know me so well that just no way I could hide it. So I needed to communicate it. They were 15, 13, 11 at the time. And so I had to put it in some kind of terms that they could understand. So I was having to say no to things that I normally would say yes to. So again, like Chris, we were on beans and toast, but things really had to get pared back. And that was hard. And I found that really difficult as a mum, who prided myself on being able to give them the best of everything, having to scale right back. But the similarities with what Chris had, also really seeing when everything got stripped away, how blessed I felt when I let go of the money. And I did that quite early also because of everything that you teach. I had to look hard and say, okay, well, what have I got? And start to become smart about the decisions I make. But I think it's important to share because Chris mentioned it as well. I felt huge responsibility on myself to what I was now going to have a knock-on effect to my kids and to all the people I had introduced to this. And at one point, the weight of that weighed so heavily on me that I thought that I would be better off not being here. And I definitely had the situation where I thought I may be better off just bowing out of life. And I had that really strong suicidal ideation that really scared the hell out of me. And I remember feeling so dirty and used and just disgusting, and knowing I'm a sea swimmer. And I thought I need to get in the water, but I don't trust myself to go by myself. So I got a friend to come with me, and she didn't want to come in because it was January and it was freezing cold. So I just said, look, just keep an eye on me. If I go under and I don't come back up, please drag my ass out. I do not. I have a lot to live for. Do not let me go under and stay under. So it got to that point with me that it really scared me. But I knew it was just some kind of ritual thing. I don't know if it's a female thing. I needed the salt water, the cold, just to wash the grime off me, because I was still having conversations with this individual because we were trying to work through it and see if we could salvage anything from it, because I was a key person in what was happening. But I remember that being just, it had such an impact on me, and that really woke me up. And as soon as that happened, I thought, okay, I need to cut loose with the money. The money, I can make that again. It's not about the money. The things that I value, I cannot put a price on, most particularly my kids. And I need to sort my shit out and be okay again. Now, I did choose, unlike Chris, to go the route of the different pieces in terms of exploring different routes of what we could do. And ironically, today we've received confirmation that, you know, there's nothing there. We knew there was nothing there, but we wanted somebody to be held account. Now, we still have a police investigation. And but I will say with this, I felt a responsibility to pursue that because this individual has set up and is going again. And I thought this is really wrong and it feels wrong
Oh
to
my
me.
God.
However, I felt it was very, very important that I keep a very, very strong boundary around my involvement in that, because at the time it was taking over my life. And I thought, no, okay, I'm going to do it because I think my instinct on it is I need to do it, but I need to keep it to a very small portion of my life. It is not going to take over the rest of the things, and most particularly my time with my kids. So I would be very particular about what time I gave to it, how much time I would spend drafting statements and emails and whatever. But I felt a really strong pull to say, no, this does not get to go again. We need to pull together. And we worked together. We very quickly got together as a community of people who'd gone through this to support each other. And that was hugely valuable because there were times we all struggled. We had one person whose tenant had committed suicide in the property because of the state the house was in, and that person had paid for the refurbishment, but it had never gotten done. So the pain that individual felt, because of what happened, somebody did lose their life, that we already know, just one person, and it was through no fault of hers, but she felt that really acutely. So we rallied together to support each other. We all had our own highs and lows, and that was a beautiful silver lining as to how people work together in the face of adversity, and, you know, made life a little bit easier in a very, very difficult time. So yeah, that's where it's at the moment.
Yeah, so huge. So Katrina, you know, like Chris had introduced his parents, you had introduced quite a few people into this. How did you process that, and how have you given the meaning to that? Because it's such a vital piece for us to, and especially as women who can often, our tentacles can go out and we can end up living in other people's lanes as part of our pleasing a performing side, and our and there's this beautiful this edge that we can have around compassion and men. I'm not explaining that as well, but it's to get really clear. What's me? What's the other person? Where's agency from? If we look at a transactional analysis side, a TA, I'm okay, you're okay. What did you use, or where are you at on that? And also being okay if other people aren't okay, because they've also got to do their work. So,
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think, I mean, I had my own highs and lows through it, but something very quickly I knew. I owned it. A bit like Chris saying, I've got this. I was like, okay, I introduced them. Now, they're all adults, so they're all responsible for their own decisions. I didn't pressure anybody at any stage. That's not my style. However, I owned the responsibility of having introduced them, and I didn't shy away from that. So I instinctively knew I don't have the solutions, but I know we need to do something with this. So I very quickly organized a Zoom call, sent the information to all the people I had ever introduced. And held space for them in terms of, okay, here's a plan of action, here are our main considerations, and this is what we're doing. And as I took each step myself, I would share them via an update or a Zoom as to where we were at. So I just stepped in straight away, and I owned it. And I said, look, I apologized up front. I had no idea, because there was a lot of suspicion on me as to how much I knew, and that was hard. But I knew I could look myself in the mirror, or look anybody in the eye, and tell them I had no idea. And I had
well,
no
I
idea
guess
what
if you
was
go
what was
back to,
coming.
almost Chris's 5 A's, there's an awareness and acceptance. You also could go, well, what's the truth in this? When I introduce people, what did you know at the time? Chris, for you, well, your brother-in-law sort of introduced you, not in the similar, Katrina was helping bringing investors in with this individual. For both of you, if people are listening and they feeling that kind of almost like taking on a burden of others in a situation, what would be some advice on that side from your side as well?
Um, I think it's intent. It's like w with my brother-in-law, clearly the intent was not there to introduce me to a fraudulent scheme, and my intent of introducing my parents was actually quite the opposite. It was to give them, more affluence so they could have a more enjoyable, more spacious retirement and elderly age. So that's the key thing. It's like the intent was not there. If there was a malintent, then I think you've got good reason then to go into shame and regret and so on. But there was never any malintent. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then Katrina, in terms of now your nowadays, you spoke about being able to keep really strong boundaries between, or divide, say, how much time and energy and emotional life force you're going to give to continuing with this, and the sense of responsibility that this person can't just be allowed to continue going, versus reclaiming your agency around your life. I love that aspiration of what you're about. Um, I love that, and I'm in awe because, frack, I know these things can get leaky. For me, I wake up at 3 in the morning, and that's there. How did you do it, and how are you doing it? Because you're still in it.
I think I think making sure my own bucket is topped up. So, I'm a sea swimmer, I play hockey, I'm connecting with my kids, keeping my life, making sure that what happened didn't define me, didn't derail me. It happened, I acknowledge it, I learned from it, and we move on, and we're holding, trying to hold what happened, get some accountability on it. But I have no attachment to how that's going to go. I'm not hanging on. Something might happen. There may be a prosecution, or there may be some money come back. I've detached from that. So it's keeping my eyes, I guess, on where I'm going, and that's to the side. So looking after my own emotional hygiene, having support,
Uh,
using
you know,
different modalities to clear that, and identifying as well, and trust. For me, I'd already had some little mini tests, but this was a massive test. Like Katrina, I had a suspicion on a number of occasions, and I had challenged the individual, and had always been explained away. But I knew at some level. I didn't factually know. I can't say, oh, okay, I saw this, and I
yeah,
knew.
yeah, yeah.
I had a feeling. My inner knowing knew something was not right, and I ignored that to my peril. So that was a massive lesson that I will be
Mm.
getting value for the rest of my life from, and that that keeps me keeps me sane now. And I couldn't have paid that amount of money to get that lesson. It was a pricey lesson. But I can now teach that as well to three other humans who will avoid making some of the mistakes I have. So, it's invaluable without a shadow of a doubt.
Extraordinary and just so beautifully put. And Chris, you spoke about, you speak about that abundance, also the abundance of others, to not letting this thing now define and break your trust with life, the universe, God, others, yourself. And Katrina, what I'm hearing you speaking about is about a bit about this as well. It's like almost a deepening of your trust with yourself. For a lot of people, that isn't what happens. So we received lots of replies back from the email we sent out on the weekend from in the Wealth Builders group, and one of the common themes is a shrinking and this, because one, shame is there, an identity piece, instead of, oh well, there were some missteps around this thing, but a lot of people put this as, I'm bad, I'm stupid, how could I, as this whole broken being, and so the loss of trust in order to make new decisions going forward. So a lot of people end up in paralysis. So either both in that victimhood, but internally just going in, not knowing what to trust, their own inner side, external side. So maybe both of you, if you could jump in and talk about this side, this you've got this deeper knowing now. Katrina, you speak about this. You know some part of you knew. How now, as you're making choices, audacious action, taking risks, going to have to trust people, life, yourself, others. What do you think is serving you in this side? So
I never went down the road of, all investment schemes are, scams or whatever. I think what you've taught in FFU provided such a solid foundation. I broke some of your rules on a big scale. And, I thought, well, you like the rules are there. They're there for a reason. They're not rocket science. Like you said, get your thrills elsewhere, not an investment. So it was going back to some of the basics and understanding why I broke them, taking responsibility from it and moving on. And I think one of the things that really helped me was talking about it. And it helped a lot of people. And I think you doing a call like this is so helpful. I spoke about this last year, and it only just happened 2 months. It was around International Women's Day, and a number of women who, I live in a small island, who came to me afterwards and shared about what their losses, and they didn't want to talk about it. So I thought, actually, you know what, I need to talk about this within reason and with boundaries in place so that it doesn't take over my life. But it happens to so many of us, and I think having conversations like this helps destigmatize it a bit and drop the shame level on it. So that was a big one for me that really helped, because it was therapeutic for me to have to speak it and to listen to some of my own wisdom as I spoke of it, and then to see others coming back at me, and what exactly like Chris said as well, it was staggering to observe the level of individual that was involved in what we were in. I mean, talking about, you immediately think, oh my God, how could I have been so stupid? And then you look around as to who else has made the same decisions. And the level of intelligence, collective intelligence in that space was astounding. But yet we all fell prey on a human level to charisma, to charm, to trusting. But I never, thankfully, got in the space of wiping everybody off, because I stacked the evidence in the opposite way. I had so many examples all around me, not in a huge way in the wealth builders and the FFU community with what you've created. There are so many examples of people in there who do these things in an ethical way with integrity, and it works really well. So I had a lot of evidence around me that contradicted what I had experienced, and I think that was a key factor. And just
that
speaking
was your
to it,
brain
not
then. So the
hiding.
importance of community, but being conscious of, is it a community that actually deserves my trust?
Yeah.
I think Brené Brown speaks about our job is we can't do this alone. We need community, but it's up to us to also protect our confidence, not in a sort of gamey way, but there's an awareness of who do you have those sort of conversations with, at which level of we open and vulnerable. But if we know that there's certain environments where those individuals emotionally, whatever level we can, are not going to be able to contain or not be able to not vomit their fear or their onto us. It's also our job not to have that. And so, thank you for reflecting, having, and why for me, I'm both proud of and so grateful for the community we have in Wealth Bills and FU as a container, a safe container, but clean, where we can have conversations without it either dropping into a pity party or a ranting or raving, but having that side. And so I love how you said consciously stacking it so we don't drop into one or the other. Chris, for you, because as a coach, we see this well when this ceiling that can happen, a traumatic event can happen, some kind of identity piece of who we believe we are or who we believe the world is, these global beliefs and things that we attach that can then be the thing that we keep pulling back on to not be able to take that audacious action. What's your take or some advice on this edge?
Um, I think it's to make things context specific. So, specific things that led to me making this investment, and I'm sure for Caitriona as well. Um, and not to globalize those. So I think I agree with you. Talking about it is really important. I think it's important to say like talking about it within private circles first, and then if you want to, public circles so that you can actually educate other people. Because the big part of like me agreeing to do this today is like I don't want other people to be, fall victim to Ponzi
And
schemes.
I'm so grateful for the two of you to speak about because it is such a
Yeah, but it's so easy. It's so easy because these people prey on the basic human, desires for safety, financial security, and so on. Neither myself nor Katrina are the wolves of Wall Street, but we're just people who are trying to, make good of our lives, make financial freedom. So anyway, there's that element. I think also there's a practical things like what I've now invested in is regulated schemes. I now have a financial advisor um, who is my kind of eyes and sort of, there's still risk, of course, but I'm diversified and all these kind of things that were previously boring to me are now, paramount for me. And I think the final element in regards to your question, I think, is meditation for me personally. That's been a big journey for me to like retrust myself because I suppose less so for myself. I did have intuition towards the end that this was potentially like not good. And I responded to one of the questions in the chat actually that, how did I make this shift so quickly to ownership? The truth is, I've been probably preparing myself mentally for a year for the worst case outcome, hoping that it wouldn't be the worst case outcome, but it was. So I think I was quite able quite quickly to shift into that mindset of ownership, because I'd secretly been preparing for it because we hadn't been able to pull money out for some time. But since this point, I've really doubled down on my meditation practice. Last week, in fact, I was on a 9-day meditation retreat. It's a big part of my work, not just with my clients, but for myself. It's just continuously, daily reconnecting with your inner truth. I think that's the best way to make good decisions in the future. And I've said no to a lot of things, more things since this has happened in a good way, not in a way I think is like,
in a fearful,
oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah, just an intuitive like, no, thank you, but no, thank you.
I'm just hearing both of you share so beautifully, and this isn't a surprise, but I always love these things. You're not sure quite what's going to really come out, but this really coming back as this incredible deep relationship with ourselves is the at the kernel of life, and almost the gift and the thing we get to play at is who are we and how do we build that relationship or recreate that deep permission of ourselves. Just topping up your tank, keeping your environment that keeps you healthy. Chris, that the meditation practices and mindfulness practice, so we actually can hear ourselves. And I'm just reminded over and over that yeah, when we are disconnected from ourselves and truth and one a phrase that one of my mentors use that I often use. If we're not moving at the speed of life, if we're moving too fast, if we're in that hustle, if we make those decisions, our ability to actually hear life inside is reduced. So for me, there is, I hate the word slow down, but I have to go like, okay, deepen. I use deepen rather than slow. But because, and I know that when I'm in that kind of fast decision making, the probability of me being able to make a discerning decision, but also is reduced. But even more so, I'm more likely going to be hooked by my monsters of fear and greed and be making decisions of those rather from, as you say, Chris, this beautiful place of, okay, I get to do this. I'm already full. I'm already complete. I mean, Katrina, and thank you both of you for this. So if I'm just noticing the time we're at, we had so many of you sharing your stories coming in, whether there's a few minutes for questions, if any of you want to ask a question, want clarification, or you want to share something. Sandy said, Chris, at any stage before you started wanting to withdraw money, did you have an inner sense that something was not right? Like Katrina said, deep down inside, she knew she didn't. Well, Chris sort of answered that, but you can jump on in again, Chris.
There were little, um, not massively, no, because from my perspective, there was a distance between myself and the trader. I never actually physically met him, although the year before I joined, there was like a high-level gathering for select clients that, was really probably a grooming process. In hindsight, I wasn't involved with that. So
Makes you feel, yeah, that inside of you is special, unique. We've got
yeah,
the, yeah.
yeah, he was doing that prior to my joining for more affluent clients. Um, there was, do you know what? I think I was less connected with myself at that time for sure. And I think if I go back with my eyes that I have today, to that period, then yes, the warning signs were there. But I think at the time I was overriding them with a greater sense that of how I wanted it to play out. Um, that's probably that's the answer.
Just thank you so much. If anybody's got a question, just put your hand up or jump on in. I just want to, from I won't go into the details aside just because we've run out of time, but one of the things I really had to make a decision around where I was essentially a whole bunch of money from a promoter of um, training course stuff that had been sold that I was still delivering on, didn't just kept the money basically stolen, took away quite substantial amounts. And I really started noticing myself getting a little bit bitter and twisted and noticing this and getting a little bit mean. And then this, how could I not notice this? A bit defensive in certain areas. And I went, well, how do and I really had to go, how do I want to live life? I love your aspiration side. And I'm got really clear that I don't want to spend any of my time in this precious time that I have in this heart, in this blink of infinity that I get to experience this incredible thing called life. Maybe there's more, I don't know, maybe there'll be a bonus, but I'm not going to take the risk on that. I'm going to like really get the most from this one. I don't want to be spending my time doubting people, questioning, are they side? And so with that, for me, part of that acceptance was there are people out there who will scam others. The scams are getting more and more sophisticated. I can spend a whole lot of my time trying to work out who's not whose side. And instead, I'd far rather approach life and relationships and most side, maybe a little bit on the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, little bit naive edge of things, with the risk that I might lose some things, as the energy that I'd rather approach life rather than being fearful, afraid, cynical, testing. And so, therefore, coming right back to Katrina, why for me, my money rules, my investing rules, my engagement rules, how do I protect my time, money side is let me rely on my frameworks to protect me of no more than X amount in one asset class, no more of X in any one component. Now, all in on our businesses, all in on our passions aside, but we can still do them within frameworks that I've accepted the humility of my humanness, that I am fallible, that as much as my intuition might know something may or may not go wrong, I'm likely to be scammed again. I'm likely to make some, well, even though they're mistakes, but I'm wanting to choose to be on that edge of life and then let the systems I have serve me. So when, not if, because it's not, I'm not being cynical about the world, the impact is reduced. And I think for me, that's also, I think, a key lesson from both of your side was there were edges that you both put yourselves at slightly bigger risks because of that sort of nose actions. And it's like, oh, okay. And that's how we then go, huh, next iteration we'll do that next line. So thank you. So I don't have any sort of last words. Linda just said such a powerful and authentic session. Thank you both for sharing. Alison said, thank you for your shares. Your strength is really palpable. And so Katrina, next step for you and your aspiration and your next audacious action?
Um, I think I guess where I am now, I'm on the obviously earlier stages than Chris. I'm on the path of 10xing, going that way. And definitely my number one word in this space is diversification. Because like you say, I totally accept something of that ilk may happen again, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. So diversification, which I'm on, and the 10x. So that's what I'm looking at. But it also that lesson of what Chris said about the wealth when you strip everything away. I've got that. So even if that happens again, I know I'll still be okay. And this time I'll be okay quicker because I've, been there. So that's very, very valuable. And having done your enough recently as well, that's just brought it to another level. So it's just keep doing doing what I'm doing. I'm in a good place and keep talking about this on opportunities. So I never say no to an invitation. We do need to have more conversations like this because sadly people do lose their lives to this, as I came very close to, and we need to make sure that stops as best if we can contribute to that and talk openly about it. And the longer time passes, the more we can do that, and the more wisdom we can extract from it. So I want to keep doing something in that space too.
Oh, and Katrina, if people want to connect with you, are you happy for Natalie to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic, both in your coaching and in your other businesses. And Chris, well, you've got this amazing business. You've worked with amazing clients. Next steps for you. What's your next audacious action?
Um, I think my next audacious action is to do more group work actually, and to be more visible, not just with this story, but there are other aspects as well. In regards, I can relate to what Katrina was saying in regards to suicidal thoughts. I've been there, not in regards to this story, but previous stuff. And something I didn't mention was my mother passing away as well, after this had happened. So there's a lot more I think that I want to offer the world at large. So doing more group work is part of my next audacious action, be more visible with my messaging. And I think the single line teaching I would leave is the definition of risk. It's so easy to go, into one's shell after something like this happens. Um, but really, playing small, if to use that phrase, is the riskiest action of all from the perspective of living a full life. So living a full life inherently comes with, doing new things, and new things may feel risky, but they definitely stack the probability in having a fuller, more experiential, richer life. So I knew as soon as that happened, if I was to rob myself of that kind of life, then the guy would have kind of, won, so to speak. I have not done that, and it's real joy to hear Katrina speak in such an ownership space as well. Lovely energy, well done on doing the inner work too, because you're not as far out of yours as I am of mine, but you will be soon. I sense that strongly. But yeah, that's my final kind of thoughts really is to just to reframe that risk perspective.
Oh, well, thank you both for your time, and thank you for everybody else showing up, for sharing your stories in our community. Sandy says my boyfriend was scammed by what seemed like an inside job in his bank, and he's now become so cynical. And now all banks are assholes, and anyone in the financial industry are assholes. And of course, we know that any of that kind of language is always a person. It's defensive. When we're cynical, when we're sad, it's defending because we're feeling shit about ourselves. And so, not being able to sit with those initial waves of shock, shame, self-judgment story is key. And at the end of the day, Sandy, I would suggest get him to watch the recording of this and for you to not get caught into that story and believe that I think is key. I just say, Katrina, maybe he can listen to this call because at the end of the day, each of us has to do that work and that journey. And it's very hard to coach a loved one because especially if they're feeling defensive already, you're just going to add to that sense of criticism. Um, wow, I'm just seeing all these messages. I hope you're reading these, Chris and Christina. We're going to also send you Chris's details if you want to connect with him in whichever way, in terms of interested in some of his him being your coach, truly extraordinary coach there. Some of the group work, which will be amazing. And yeah, let's just keeping in right relationship with the resources we have. Our time, money, and our energy are here to serve us, and the opportunity to keep just exploring where we're not yet free, where we, hooking into one area is just such a beautiful, powerful side. And thank you for your ongoing trust and that I get to do this. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Christina. See you, and I'll see many of you real soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.